Hey, Scattered Redeemer family. Thanks for joining us again for, I guess, what you would call another episode of Pastoral Quick Takes. Wanted to offer you some encouragement from the book of Psalms as we consider gathering together in person again. Psalm 122 says, I was glad when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. Now, I didn't look into this maybe as deeply as I could have, but I don't believe that Jerusalem was suffering at this time from a pandemic and the government had just lifted the regulations. But maybe you can check further into that. However, throughout this psalm, the psalmist does say that he's praying for peace in Jerusalem because he's so glad that he's going to get to travel there and go to the temple, the house of God. And so it is interesting right off the bat that there's some direct correlation for us, and I'd even challenge you, how much have you been praying that this pandemic, that this virus would go away for the sake of us getting to gather together again in person and enjoy the fellowship that God created us for? Just a nice correlation right off the bat from Psalm 122:1 for us. It's not exactly what I was planning on talking about together, but it is something worth considering right off as we look at the scriptures. And it says, "I was glad when they said to me, 'Let us go to the house of the Lord.'" The temple, or the house of the Lord, is where the Spirit of the Lord dwells, and His people worshipped Him in the Old Testament. In fact, the Old Testament says many times when the priests offered a burnt offering and sacrifices to the Lord that they were sweet-smelling aroma to Him. And of course, anyone that's had a barbecue can attest to that, right? So when Christians gather this day and age, we're actually carrying out the tasks of the temple, and our Davidic king is Jesus, and He is present with us when we gather together as Christians. We know that we are the house of God because of passages like in Hebrews where we are called the priesthood. We're called a royal priesthood as Christians. Ephesians 2:22 actually says, "In Him," that is Christ, "you are also being built together into a dwelling place for God by the Spirit." And then Galatians 6 calls us as believers the household of faith. I want to bring to our attention a couple of things about our gladness as we begin to gather again as the household of faith together in person. I want to point out that we shouldn't simply be glad because we're getting to do something that we have missed doing, like shopping or an amusement park or something like that. Yes, we should just be happy that we get to gather together again, and it is good. But the scriptures make it clear that we are not to forsake the assembling of ourselves together. That the church as a body, as a whole that gathers together, was given to each other as gifts to build one another up to love and good works, for the work of the ministry, the scriptures say, for spreading and preserving the gospel together with Christ. And these are just a few things the New Testament says about us as a believer and as the household of faith. And these are reasons we ought to be glad to be gathering together again, is because Christians cannot survive or thrive without growing together as a church body into the head, who is Jesus. And that's God's design for us as a church. And so it's not just a nice thing that we're missing doing right now. It's actually a necessity that we're missing because we cannot live without it in God's design for things. It's the very reason why we've taken great efforts to keep in contact with as many people from the Redeemer body as we can. And we've spent time and money and effort to stream services and everything else that we've been doing to help us encourage one another in any way possible in this time that we can't be together physically. And so we want to be glad because this is the way God has designed for us to grow as His children, and we want to be glad that we could gather together again, as I presume and believe that most of us are. But secondly, I just want to talk about how Gladness might look a little different for each person, and that's okay as well. Just because someone or you might not be comfortable coming back the first weeks of our services beginning together again, it doesn't mean that you're less glad, right, than someone else. There's just room for interpretation and for safety and all these things to be considered. So let's be continue, as we've encouraged one another, to be kind to each other in our judgments, and not think that someone's not glad to be a part of the household of faith throughout all this. Some people will come that first Sunday, will be rejoicing with hands held high, while others are going to have heavy hearts about all the loss that has happened throughout this, everything that's been suffered. And, both these things really are appropriate. We should rejoice that we're back together again in person when it does happen. But we should also be considering and be mourning the effects of sin on this world, whether it be in the form of sickness, lost jobs, death, even the fact that we have to have multiple services and can't be all together at one time yet. It's not a full restoration, right? And until we get to be in heaven, there won't be a full restoration of this earth. But we can especially feel it right now with the effects of the coronavirus and everything that's going on. But whatever our emotional state is, I want to encourage us that we want to be glad to be going through it together as a body, and we want to look forward to getting together in person again and being able to care for each other in this way. And so let's be glad when someone says, let us go to the house of God and enjoy being able to walk through these things together. Guys, may God bless you and keep you and cause his face to shine upon you. Love you all.